Thank you. I'm Elliot. If you don't know me, I'm Elliot Paull. I'm in the OTG tip group. I'm the liaison with the Windows division. We're here to talk about something called Springboard and its impact on line of business applications. A couple presentations. This is Stephanie Martin. She's taken over responsibility for the early adopter program with the Windows clients. And first, thanks for all those who are eager to test SP2 of Windows XP, either part of the beta escrow program, which you've actually never done before on the Windows side, is actually test something that earlier. I guess you've done it on Office, but never on Windows. And we'll go through a bunch of changes. This is be a pretty interactive session. If you have specific questions, make sure you, if we don't know the answer, we'll make sure we get feedback and follow up to you. So this is the intent to be able to understand the impact of these things as Microsoft's first and best customer. Probably just to raise the stakes, if you're not aware, 2 months ago or so, senior management decided that we needed to do a much better job in helping our customers, similar to something you probably heard Steve Ballmer talk at company meeting, but specifically around server and client issues on security, hence an initiative called Springboard. The first deployment vehicle of that will be on the client side, Windows XP, SP2. The first release will be a beta release, which will be sometime this month, now that we're in November, and the first customer will be you. If you don't find it, somebody else will in short order, and so our expectation is that we're trying to get as upfront information as possible for a couple reasons. One is to ensure that the feedback goes right to the product group because they're on a very tight accelerated schedule. And secondly, we understand the experience around some of these things because we are making certain decisions whether or not some of these activities, which may have been intended for the small business or for the individual consumer, whether they're applicable in the enterprise environment as well. And understanding how we actually do that, you are all part of that piece of that equation. So making that understood and articulated is important. Is that all? Have I raised the gain? And then if your management says, I'm sorry, you've got something more important, let me know because we'll work those issues. The directive clearly has come down from Mike Adams, who we asked to be at this meeting, and Rick Devenuti this is company critical. We need to do whatever we need to do to support the product groups on this stuff. And if you run into any issues, let us know. So far, we haven't had any. So I assume that the message has been pretty well communicated and people are willing and able to engage. I don't see any dissenting votes, so any other questions or comments from me? Elliot P., you know where to find me, I'm sure you all. So, this is Michael, by the way.
So as Elliot mentioned, my name is Stephanie Martin. I work in OTG and I'm part of the global software deployment team. And my main function is to make sure that all of our line of business applications are compatible with Windows XP SP2. So today we'll talk a little bit about the app compatibility program that I run. And then we'll go through some of the specific changes that are being introduced with Windows XP SP2. And we'll have a number of presenters both from within OTG and as well as the product group, the Windows product group talk. Before we get started, though, just want to mention it's an interactive session, so feel free to ask questions. This is a prime avenue for doing that. We want to get your feedback, your input, clarify anything for you. And then if you haven't had a chance, sign up right outside the door so we make sure we get the presentation to you, any additional details to you after the meeting. Okay, so the goal of our app compatibility program is to make sure that our applications are compatible, that we identify any issues, and that we get them addressed prior to our external customers seeing them. With that, we've targeted some very specific applications, those that require client installation, those that are web-based, those that use ActiveX controls, and some additional ones that we think could be impacted by Windows XP SP2. Our shared goals for the program, we've broken up the applications into two different categories. The top 30 applications are our most critical applications, and those are examples like MSE, Siebel, HeadTracks, SAP. Those we want to make sure are tested during the escrow phases, prior to any desktop deployments at Microsoft, we want to make sure that we're identifying any critical issues with the applications prior to the bits being deployed to Microsoft clients. Then we've got an additional 150 applications that will give us broad coverage and exposure, and those will be tested during the Beta 1 and RC timeframes. Those of you who have applications that are part of our targeted list, you've probably gotten several emails from me already. If you're not part of our testing program, feel free to log on to our team site. You can also join our team DL if you want to get pertinent information, or you can contact me directly. So our test schedule. These are key dates. One thing to know is that our schedule really depends on the products group schedule. Anytime the product group schedule changes, our schedule changes. I know it may suck because I know you do a lot of planning on your end to meet the schedule, but it's really something we have no control over, and the product group wants to get us some really solid codes. We want to make sure that we're right along the lines of their schedule. As I know it today, November 7th is when we receive beta escrow. That's when we'll test the top 30 applications.
Probably going to be the 10th.
Okay. Current news, the 10th. Then potentially November 18th, roughly thereabouts. That may change based on this new information. We'll receive the beta bits in order to test the additional 150 applications. Some other key dates. You'll hear more about these specific things that we're going to be talking about. ICF Plus Internet Connection Firewall. That'll be available in the beta escrow, as well as the WMI changes and the IE changes. And so we'll have specific scenarios in which we'll want you to test your applications around those changes. Post-beta 1, we'll see ActiveX changes come into play. And then in June, roughly, of 2004, we'll see the MSJVN stuff kick in. Any questions before I turn it over? Okay. Again, my name's Stephanie Martin. You can email me, phone me, join our team DL, whatever you need to do to get a hold of me and ask questions. So these are the changes we'll talk about today. Microsoft Java Virtual Machine, ActiveX, Internet Connection Firewall, Windows Management Instrumentation, and Internet Explorer. So with that, I'll turn it over to Olivier. Yeah.
Is the ActiveX related to EOS?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep. And you'll hear more about that.
That's your slide. That's okay.
Oh, Andy, I'm sorry. You want to do yours? No, you're next, Olivier. You just didn't have a slide. You didn't have a slide, so.
It's done. Hi, my name is Olivier Dose, and I work for TIP. As you may or may not know, as part of a court settlement between Microsoft and Sun, Microsoft has agreed to remove and stop supporting any Java virtual machine implementation that we have had. This means that all applications, this means that really the Java virtual machine will not be supported, updated, or maintained on the Microsoft side after September 04. The date was originally January 04, but we got a court extension to get it to September of this year, which pretty much means that any application relying on the Java virtual machine, and there are quite a few, will be impacted by this change, and will need to migrate either to another Java virtual machine, which is probably not the preferred way, or to a .NET-based language. Currently, there's an email from Rick Devenuti asking everybody to remove all dependencies to Java virtual machine for November 1st. So we passed the deadline, and we're not going to meet that deadline because we didn't have a tool to identify if your application was dependent on the Java virtual machine or not until very recently. We do have a tool now. It's not production ready yet, but it's getting closer. And so as soon as the tool will be available, a broader communication will be sent out, and we'll do a systemic scan of all the machines that we have to find out what application is dependent on the Java virtual machine. And once we have identified the applications, we will work with the different teams to find what the migration plan is. An awful lot of the applications dependent on the virtual machines are third-party applications, and we have very little control on those. So we will need to influence vendors as much as we can to move their application away from the the Microsoft implementation of the virtual machine before September 04, and preferably not to another Java-based engine. There are some applications, one of them is the Siebel implementation, who's moving to a Sun JRE implementation, and legal is all up in a battle over that. So don't assume that you can replace one Java virtual machine with another. It might not. It will be an exception that we will have to grant on a case by case. The date of June 4th is really a date that we've picked out of the blue right now, since we haven't met the November 1st deadline from Devanudi. We're planning on rescheduling that, and right now, out of the assumption is we would want to have all dependencies identified and addressed by June 04. So that's pretty much it.
Olivier, how many apps are known to be using Java?
Right now we've identified around 25, ranging in if you've used Visual InterDev to develop an application, and if you've used a remote scripting feature of Visual InterDev, your application is therefore dependent on the virtual machine. But we have a fix for that. We have an ActiveX controller.pss made for that. So right now we have identified between 25 and 35 applications in various sizes, mostly third-party applications.
Is there an easy way to identify which app is using MSDVM?
There is a tool provided by the Windows Product Group called Ranger. The tool is not production ready just yet. It's still beta. We've dog-fooded the tool a month ago. As soon as the tool is ready, we'll broadcast the pointer to it.
Okay, ActiveX issue. I think a lot of you probably have had emails from me, or at least your dev managers and architects should have done, or if you are an app owner in MS Apps, we spammed everybody a month or so ago regarding this. Very cryptic because it was involving a lawsuit and the IE group wouldn't let me say much. This slide gives you the background on it. I'm not going to enter an opinion on why, because they told me not to say stuff like that. I cut and pasted most of this straight from that press page that's listed there, but there's a ruling against us. Microsoft are going to appeal, but for now they're going to put some changes into IE to change IE so that it isn't covered by that patent. What does this mean to you guys? If you do absolutely nothing, you're going to see a dialog box like that come up on the screen. When you press OK, the application carries on running exactly as it did before. You'll get one of these dialogues every time you go to the page, and you'll get one for every ActiveX control. So if you have a page with 7 ActiveX controls, you'll get this dialog 7 times, the user will press OK 7 times, and then the page will work. It's something to do with the wording of the patent, I'm sure, but once again, I'm not going to speculate on exactly why. The main thing about it is that the ActiveX or scriptlets, the MSDN page isn't specific on that, but the MS Insight guys found that it breaks scriptlets as well, is if it refers back to an external source. So if you have a URL as one of the parameters for the ActiveX control, then this is likely to cause a problem. Forward is on the left, which seems really illogical to me here. How are you guys going to test this? Either devs or testers. The IE team have released a version of IE which includes the changes that they have got in to date at that URL there. It's real easy to install. It does a side-by-side install. There isn't a setup program. It just unzips itself into a folder. You can pick which folder. If you run IE from that folder, you get the new version. If you run your regular IE, you get the old version. So you haven't got any worries about DLL conflicts or anything like that. So it's perfectly safe to put on any machine that you like. If you don't see the dialog, you're clean. You've got nothing more to worry about. How do you fix it? As I mentioned, it's It's all to do with referring to external resources. So for those of you who are developers or have looked at HTML, you get an object tag which refers to the ActiveX control or scriptlet, and you get param tags which pass parameters to it. So you could say this object tag is a button and one of the parameters is a color blue. But equally you can say the object tag is a stock ticker and the parameter is go to this web service by this URL and pick up the current stock price. That's the kind of control that's going to fall foul of this because it refers to an external URL. If you've got no param tags in there, then the dialog won't appear. If you have param tags but they don't refer to external data, my understanding of the article is IE will do its best to try and work this out. It may or may not get it right or wrong depending on how complex the URLs are in there. But if you know for sure that you don't have any external references, you can add the no external data, and I hope that's big enough that some of you can see it on there, tag into your object tag. At that point, IE will ignore any parameters that it thinks are external URLs, but you should get rid of the dialog. One other alternative is that you can actually base 64 encode your URLs. Again, seems strange, but it must be something to do with the patent wording, I'm sure. If you base 64 them so that they're not URLs anymore, you then have to decode them, and there's some MSDN code to help you get around that. Unfortunately, there's no way around this without making code changes. Option 2, which I know several groups are actually going to be using, is if you actually inject the object tags into your HTML through an external script file, it can't be script in the same file, it has to be an external script file, then you will not get the dialog. So the example here, the bit between the HTMLs is the original file where the object tag used to be, and you can see a call to replace content, and at the bottom there's the function. So your code stays exactly the same in that point, that example. You cut and paste it out into a different script file. Once again, this code changes, but it's fairly routine. Hopefully there aren't a lot of ActiveX controls out there, otherwise this will be fairly extensive. Other applications besides ones you write and you have access to the source code of. MS Insight uses scriptlets, is affected by it. The MS Insight team are aware of it. They've already put their workaround into their new code base, which they told me this morning the release date is the 12th. That's version 7.5. If you pick up that release, you will get the fixes and you'll have no problems. If you want older versions, they are doing fixes for some, I don't know which, but you guys will have to contact them when this affects you, and they'll have those ready by the time the releases come out. SharePoint's an interesting one because none of us really have access to the source code for that one, but lots of people have got sites on SharePoint. The only thing that they know about it working on is the grid view control, which is not used in a lot of places, but if you bring up a file folder and say, show me this in a grid view. They're working on a fix. It's going to ship with Service Pack 1 of SharePoint. I didn't have a date, but they're planning that it lines up with Service Pack 2 of XP. If you customize your grid view, it won't get updated automatically. The way SharePoint works is it picks up customized content from a central place. If you've customized it, it creates a shadow copy of that with your changes in. There's no way they can go and inject their changes into your code. So probably not going to hit a lot of people, but something to worry about. Apparently it doesn't affect version 1 sites. That's what they told me. Current information that these bits will be in the final SP2 of XP, but not in any of the releases they've talked about today. Let me know if that changes, because we've had very different opinions. I also took the SharePoint guys today, and they mentioned to me that content management server sites are affected when you're in edit mode. I don't have any more information on it because they mentioned it to me today, but they use ActiveX controls a lot for the editing component of it. It shouldn't affect your viewing of it. I will endeavor to find out more about that. So if you want more information, contact me. There's my email. That's me. Any questions?
So testing's already begun on some applications.
It should have been. I sent an email very cryptic about a month and a half ago warning people, and then there was a follow-up to as many of the app owners replied saying yes, they had ActiveX control. So if hopefully most IT teams around Microsoft are already aware of this to some extent.
I'd like to add that, in addition, we've targeted any applications that are using ActiveX controls via the emails that Andy got back as part of our testing efforts on the beta 1 bits. Potentially, even though we know we're not getting code changes in there, it'll give you another opportunity to run through if you haven't any scenarios.
the bits aren't really going to hit out there probably until early next year when it makes it into the SP2 build. At that point, your support orgs might hear about it if you haven't picked it up, because that dialog box is going to be pretty obvious. A lot of people at Microsoft generally click through dialogues when they see OKs on, so you might not hear anything about it whatsoever, but I'm pretty sure if you've got any apps that have 7 ActiveX controls, you're going to hear about it. But maybe 1 or 2, they won't. But yeah, tell your support orgs if they're not here today that coming in the new year, then maybe you have to watch for that. It's pretty simple to do a search on your source code for object tags. And that should pick up anything. Any more questions?
What is the time frame?
The current word, and the IE guys are probably here today, can probably confirm more than I, is that it will be out with SP2, which was February.
January, February is roughly RC time frame. And we're hoping to get it in
But you shouldn't have to worry about the, when they roll the beta out to the OTG audience, you shouldn't have to worry about that breaking your apps, because the current word is that it's not in those builds. But this is all, as you heard, changing very quickly, so you keep your eye open for that dialog. It might be worth you all installing that IE and turning it on so that you guys can be testers, and you can email the product groups, the IT groups back when you find one of their apps that has that dialog in case they didn't know that.
Question. Will the pre-release of the IE version you mentioned earlier be different from the beta escrow that will be coming out this Monday or Monday next week?
Yes, I believe it will be, because the beta escrow build will not have the ActiveX changes in. But like I said, they go side by side, so there shouldn't be a testing problem. Check back to that MSDN website that I linked earlier to. They're up to the 4th version of this on that website right now, so they appear to be putting a new build up every couple of weeks. But it's side by side, so the escrow build can come out, and that will replace your main IE, and then you just have this other one in a folder that you can run at any time. Thanks, guys.
I'm Michael Surkan, and I'm in the Network and Communications product team.
Is that turned on?
Yes. Now it is. So I'm Michael Surkan, and I'm in the Network and Communications group in the Windows division. And specifically, I'm working on, one of the things that I'm working on is the Springboard Firewall. And it's interesting, a little bit of background for this is with all of the latest virus attacks and worms that have been coming out, there's 2 ways to solve the security vulnerabilities. One way is to have perfect code and to have no vulnerabilities in the software that we ship to customers. And the second way is to put locks on the doors so that viruses can't even, or that there can't be attacks on those vulnerabilities that exist that may be in the system. And with the recent batch of widespread attacks that happened, management made a decision that we needed to, not only did we need to continue focusing on improving our code, but we need to work more on having the doors on putting more doors on the system. And the Internet Connection Firewall was a ready tool that we had to accomplish that in short order. And it's actually amazing when I think of how many friends that I helped through some of their security issues on their PCs at home. It's amazing how many people didn't have the Internet Connection Firewall on. It's there. It's an option. They can just go to the network interface and turn it on, and then they're relatively secure. And in most cases, they don't need. Most home users never had any issues once it was on. And so the entire effort behind the ICF Plus in the new ICF release in Springboard is there's one simple concept behind it all. ICF is on by default. And it's interesting if you think, well, if that's all it is, then why is there so much development effort going on in the product team that I'm involved with? Well, it has to do with trying to make ICF more configurable, because once you turn the firewall on, you find that there are a lot of things that don't work as they did before. Now, for a lot of home users, this isn't a problem because most of the applications that they use aren't affected, but there are a lot of things that are, and there are home users that are even going to be affected by this as well. So the only way that we could turn it on by default was to give more configurability so that the users could allow the firewall, or configure the firewall to allow more things through and to work with some of the applications that they felt were important. And so that's largely what I'll be talking about today. In the Springboard firewall, ICF now supports a protected mode. That's really the big new thing. There's also something called shielded mode, and largely shielded is the same thing as what ICF is today. Today, by default, ICF only allows outbound traffic. It will not allow unsolicited inbound communication. So it works fine if you're on your PC, you go to a website, you're initiating that session, and it will allow the responding communications to come back. But if you want to set your PC up as a server, you want to be a web server yourself, or you want to do file sharing, and somebody then tries to come and communicate with your machine, but you had not sent them a request in the first place, it won't accept it. So today, if you go to Windows XP and enable ICF, it will not allow any inbound connections as the server. So the big feature that we are putting into ICF Plus is the ability to allow, is protected mode, which means it has configurable inbound communication. So the shielded mode in ICF Plus, for all intents and purposes, means it's behaving the way ICF does today. It doesn't allow inbound communication. So shielded sounds like it's some amazing thing that we're doing, and it is very secure. But that's today's ICF, and today's ICF is very secure. It just happens to break a number of things that you might be using. And so all the interfaces are firewalled with ICF. There's boot time security. So when you first power up the machine, ICF will be protecting the ports inbound and outbound. That's not configurable. There's no way to configure that to say I do want it to allow some incoming requests while it's booting up. And it's very locked down. It allows some outbound communications actually when the system is booting up, but inbound it doesn't allow at all. And we have file and print sharing support now, which is one of the #1 issues that people that came up with doing ICF, of applications people wanted to do. We support multiple policies, so there can be more than one set of set of configuration options for ICF, and the terminology we're using is domain domain policy and your local policy. And when you're running a domain policy, the ICF will constantly keep doing LDAP binds to the directory service, and as long as it can do these LDAP binds, it will run in the domain policy. But as soon as it can't do a bind, it will revert to the local policy. So this allows administrators to configure the system's ICF so that when it's not in the not on their corporate network, that it will behave differently than when it is. So maybe you want the system to be more secure when it's not in the corporate environment. Maybe if it's not in the local environment, you want to ensure that people can't do file sharing or they can't do other things. It's also possible people could do the reverse. Some of my colleagues have suggested that maybe administrators or people would want their users at home to have more capabilities. I don't know. We leave the choice up to the administrators to define this. As I mentioned, protected mode allows much more granular control. You can open specific ports. You can choose allowed programs. You can add programs to a list of you can add application names to a list of allowed programs that can come through the firewall. These are things that you cannot do with ICF today. And applications can register themselves through APIs to the firewall. So we're working with ISVs to communicate to them how they can build their applications to automatically take advantage of ICF, to tell it what ports and other things they need. And ICF as well has some ICF Plus has some intelligence to be able to determine whether a given app is opening the ports or not. There could what it's trying to do and allow that if it was on the list. There are some. Well, I won't get into some details about that. Now, a key thing is, yes, ICF Plus is configurable, but you have to know what you want to configure. If you're running an application and it's being blocked by default in protected mode, you now have to go in and open the right ports or add it to the allowed list. But if you don't know what ports it needs, you're going to have a problem. And ICF itself does not tell you what the app is trying to do or where the issues are. So for developers, it's important that they tell the users what their applications are doing with the network, so that users can configure the firewall if they want to. And it also means for testing as you're testing these applications and trying to figure out what settings you need, you might have to talk with the developer, go to the ISV or whatever to understand what it is doing on the network. And another aspect of ICF Plus is that it can now be managed through group policy. There actually was a single group policy setting with today's ICF, but that just enabled the interface or not, the user interface. We go much further than that. You can now do most of the same settings through the group policy administration that you can from the client UI. There's a lot of caveats and so on, and I'd be happy to go over that in depth with people as they need it. And you can prevent the local policy from working on the there's an option in group policy to prevent local policy from being active, so that only the domain policy would be allowed. And these are the key things, the key aspects of ICF Plus, and I'm sure we're all going to learn to love it. And any questions? Yes?
You say all interfaces are firewalls, so does it mean even the VPN interface which is on the system?
The VPN interface would also be protected. It would be the same policy.
This is the default.
The default is it's on all interfaces. So any interface that opens up would be subject to ICF.
And does it still require the user to be an admin to enable firewall?
No. Well, to enable the firewall, by default, the firewall's on. So the firewall would be on your system all the time, no matter what.
Okay, but if we turn it off and then if I want to turn it on, leave it on, do I still need to be an admin?
It depends whether you can, if an administrator had set it to be off, you can't override that as an end user if you don't have local admin privileges. But if you as the end user had turned it off, you could go and turn it back on.
So we turn that around. If the administrators have elected that the ICF is going to be turned on with a specific configuration, as the local admin on the machine, can I override network administrators' policy?
Yes, but you wouldn't necessarily be able to do it through the UI. You might have to go through the MMC snap-in. So an end user with local admin privileges, if they load the MMC snap-in, they can change all of the options that the administrator had set. And you can also, if you have local admin privileges, go directly into the registry yourself. But if you go into the ICF UI locally, and the administrator had said they didn't want you to be able to change local settings, the options would be grayed out and you couldn't alter them from there. So.
When you say administrator has wanted it to be on, and you are trying, and you are a local admin. When you say administrators, is that domain level administrator or the local machine administrator?
A local machine administrator can turn if you have local admin privileges, you can turn the system on or off. Now, domain administrator can create policy that will override local admin settings, but a local admin could still go and override the domain policy. Now, as I said, the domain administrator can make life complicated for the local admin. The domain administrator can say, I don't want you to be able to change the options through the local UI, which then means as the local admin, you'd have to go into the registry or run a snap-in or something in order to change that. So it's not super easy for you. So.
For this testing, I see here in Stephanie's email that ICF class has to be installed, right, by the OTG, right?
So what's happening with ICF Plus for our testing efforts is if you install Windows XP SP2 as part of our beta escrow, end of week, next week, whenever we get the bits, we will be, corporate security will be deploying a group policy to look for machines that have that particular build running, and it will enable ICF Plus to be turned on by default so we can complete our testing.
What kind of configuration we're going to have? I mean, I'm hearing that there are different configurations, right, for ICF Plus.
What do you mean?
And you can configure, right?
Well, you can configure ICF Plus to run in different modes. Now, by default, ICF Plus will be running in protected mode. And by default, it doesn't have many ports or applications that are allowed. So protected mode, default protected mode is almost the same as shielded. The difference between default protected mode and shielded is that you can configure protected mode to allow more things in. So if you just install Service Pack 2 on your machine, you're going to, it's, for all intents and purposes, it's going to behave very similar to what a machine today would act like if you go and enable ICF. So if you want to know what would happen to a lot of your applications, just go and enable ICF on your box today, and it's there. I mean, it is an option. So if you enable ICF, you'll see what would happen without any configuration of the firewall if you run your applications. So then once you install it, then the question is, well, what are you going to configure it to allow, and what things are you going to open or not? Now, an administrator could make a lot of these. Could pre-configure a lot of these options and deploy it through group policy, which means that a lot of common things are already open for users, so they don't have to worry about those things that they want to do. I mean, clearly, there is a point at which the value of the firewall is diminished if you keep opening things, right? If you open up every single port on the system, then one could argue there's not a lot of value in having the firewall. So the idea, and from most users, there really is a small subset of ports that they really need for the applications and things that they do. And in general, this is this is going to be something Microsoft is doing going forward with next generation firewalls and so on. There's no sense in having every single door open on your system if there's things you're not using that don't need to have them open. And
so to complement the ICF Plus, are you providing some level of guidance to the developers and the administrators about scenarios that are the most appropriate scenarios in an enterprise? I mean, it sounds like there's some good guidance that could be given to our developer community to minimise the number of ports that are open, and methodology. It sounds like there should be some guidance around the network administrator. Are you providing that as part of this program?
Well, there's definitely guidance that we're coming out with to ISVs and developers, to the whole development community of what's the best thing you should do with your applications to minimize the impact on the firewalls and to self-configure yourself with the firewall. So that we're absolutely doing. There will be some administrative guidance that we will be coming out with as well, and frankly, that's very embryonic, is developing what that guidance is going to be. But we will have some documentation and so on that we come out with on that.
So I guess I'm wondering, are we validating scenarios for you through this process?
The answer is yes,
Yes.
absolutely. The feedback that you give us in the next 2 weeks on how your applications work or don't work with ICF Plus is going to be a critical part of whether or not we deploy this at Microsoft. And there's a window not only just with the applications, but with other groups within OTG that are running this pilot to validate whether or not this makes sense for Microsoft. So just because they're providing this feature and this capability in the product doesn't mean that we're going to necessarily roll it out internally at Microsoft.
Well, and OTG is your deployment of the pilot and hopefully larger deployments will help us define what scenarios this really works in well or not. I will be the first to admit this is not as sophisticated or as complete of an enterprise firewall system as we would like to have. And we're working on more advanced firewalls for the future. This is something that we wanted to come out. It was important for Microsoft to come out with a solution to our customers quickly without making them wait years to have some relief to the security problems that they're seeing. And we want to find the best ways that companies can utilize this technology that we have to in their scenarios. So, was there a question there?
Yeah. Is there going to be a way to configure ports open during installation, or are you completely relying on group policy to manage opening and shutting ports?
Well, applications, there is an API that applications can use to register themselves with the firewall. So if your application used those APIs, you would automatically be opening up the capabilities in the firewall that your application would need to work. If your application didn't automatically didn't use these APIs on install, then the end user you'd have to provide instructions to the users who install it that they need to go and manually open the ports that you require for your program to work. And in many cases, you don't even need to open a port. Because we have this concept of allowing applications or application awareness, users can, and the application can just specify the app itself. And in many cases, ICF Plus will be intelligent enough to know to work just for that app of what it needs when it wants to open ports and so on.
I'm a little confused if that works for upgrades or updates versus clean installations of an app or an OS.
Well, it would work.
You could register the application in the API, but that doesn't work if you already have the application loaded, right?
Well, but if you're running an install, doing an upgrade, I would assume that install process could be tailored to include configuring the APIs as necessary. I mean, this is a specific thing you'd have to work out, but and we have guidance that we have for ISVs and developers, and that's something we could definitely work to give more details on.
Would it be possible for administrators to do something like that? Administrators who don't necessarily work with APIs?
Well, from an administrative standpoint, what you would likely do as an administrator is simply say you were going to add a program to the allowed list and deploy that through your group policy. So as an administrator, I could say, there's a particular application I want to make sure my users can run through the firewall. I'm going to go and add this into the allowed list in group policy, and you would distribute that to all of your systems.
So the answer is no, an administrator can configure ports open or shut during installation?
Not during installation. There wouldn't be any intelligence to know that only while you're installing it should do that. The administrator would have had to have done this beforehand.
You can add a little script or something into the installation.
Well, yeah, I mean, there's command lines that can set this. There's APIs. So yes, your install process, however you want to build the install process, it could run a script that ran the command line that set these ports open as well. There's ways to do this. There's a lot, and you have to look at what makes the most sense for the app that you're working on.
Who would I talk to find out the ways to do it?
Well, you can use me as a contact, and I can get you the information. There are some white papers and so on that we have for. So it's Surkan is my alias.
Hi, my question is related to line of business testing on this ICF feature. So the extent of the testing is just to enable ICF and then run our applications against it. And if we have a list of 50 apps and 48 don't work, is that that kind of thing that you're looking for?
Absolutely, yep.
Okay.
At the very end of this
configuration.
At the very end of this presentation, you'll see some specific test instructions on testing ICF Plus, and you guys can follow that and let me know if you have additional questions.
Do you want me to keep answering questions, or is this?
One or two more.
Okay. Question in the back?
Actually, I've tried to turn it on, and it seems to be turned off and grayed out by default. I don't know if that's OTG.
That could be OTG.
How do we get around that?
Well,
don't worry, your pretty little tech will take care of that.
Okay. Well.
If you're in the resident domain, right now, it's turned off by default, and you can't turn it on. Okay? When you get SP2, Stephanie has asked, give me your machine name. We will put those machine names in a special OU for group policy to allow you to turn it on or turn it off. Everybody else will be turned off by default, unless you're in the NT world, the development world, and they don't have it on by policy. Okay? Question that I want to ask you that you need to run. So, what information can you give to people? I want more information than 48 out of 50 didn't work. I want to know what broke. So the question is, how can you tell what breaks? What prescriptive guidance, what information can you give that says, this is what you need to do, and how do I know what port to turn on?
Well,
because each app is different.
there's two answers to that. The best answer is I can talk with our test people to come up with, to give you guidance on how they're doing testing on these apps themselves. And one of the biggest things they do is they have some third-party tools that watch what's going on with ports and what applications are trying to do. I mean, that's what that's one of the ways they do this. And I don't know specifically which tools they're using, but I can get that information for you. And the other thing is talking with the ISV, or with the developer, finding out from them. And we do that a lot. I mean, there's a lot of cases where we've tried something, a service that a different group at Microsoft is responsible for, and it broke. And then we contacted them and we said, well, what are you doing? What exactly does your application need? And just using the tools actually to tell you what the application is doing is not always entirely, it works that way, but it can tell you more than you need to know. Because it could turn out that the application only needs to really have one port open, and then once it starts its sessions, it then opens up 20 other ones. But it would be bad to automatically lock all 20 open all the time when it really only one was needed to initiate the session. So even if you have these tools, that you got to be careful with how you interpret what you see. So you're not opening up more vulnerabilities than you need to. Okay, I gotta go.
Is there going to be anything available in the event logs for us to go to troubleshoot?
There are event logs to look at if ICF isn't working, but it doesn't tell you much about what it's denying. So if there are things getting blocked and so on, ICF does not give you a lot of data as to what it's blocking.
That's not the firewall log?
There's a little bit of information, but not. We don't use that a lot in our tests to find out why things aren't working or what's being blocked. It's much better to tell us why ICF is misbehaving.
Are there any plans to incorporate that sort of logic into ICF Plus in the future? So if we're looking to provide this to the general public, then one thing that I would think would be if I get an inbound communications, it would be great if ICF would pop up and say, inbound communications from application blah, 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 this port, at this port right here. Do you want to open it temporarily? Do you want to open it permanently? I click yes, no, or he configures it for me. I'm not talking about here where group policy may overwrite that. I'm talking about out with the general audience. It seems to me like that's the way to get ICF to work. Right? ICF knows what communication is coming in, what application is trying to communicate, and then pops up a dialog box that allows me to make the choice, do I want to open the port or not? Do I want to open the port just one time, or do I want to leave the port open all the time?
That's something, I know that we're doing that in our next generation firewall.
That's what I was asking, right? If there was long-term plans for that.
So you mean like zone alarm and black ice does today?
Yeah.
It pops up and says Internet Explorer is trying to open firewall to go out to the internet. I know that this has been looked at and there's been quite a lot of discussion about it. Part of the problem is lots of our processes wrap up inside parent processes like service host. So when the process tries to go out, it's the parent process which tries to leave the machine, and it's just a very generic process name which tries to connect to the internet. So try to take something like that and make it meaningful in the short space of time that we have for development between now and when we release SP2. There's just not enough time.
Yeah, again, I was talking about long-term plans and inbound communications, which of course is what ICF was all about. So just wanted to make sure that was on the roadmap.
Oh yeah, in the next generation firewall, it would alert you much more. There's a lot more configurability and user prompting when things happen.
Verbose.
Yes.
Additionally, oftentimes group policy, if I change my local policy on my machine, it can be overwritten by group policy. Are we going to know that when we load SP2, that some of these things will be, if I change it as a local administrator, that the next time I reboot my machine, all my changes are gone, and I'm now changing it again?
There's nothing that ICF does to tell you that things are going to be changed by the...
Understood, but we're implementing the group policy ourselves, such that who's ever on that list of people using ICF, it would be nice for them to know if their local policy changes will be overwritten by group policy, or if there's some group policy changes that will always override and others that are configurable.
Well, we can. I can tell you in more depth which which settings, group policy settings, will override local policy and so on. I can tell you that, but there's nothing in ICF that will alert users to what things are going to be overridden and so on, or tell them that when you reboot your system and the domain policy.
So we just need to know what will be overridden.
Yeah, I can work with you on that in detail.
We'll work with the policy people.
There is a DCR going through at the moment where there's a concept of shields up. We were at a meeting earlier on today where we were discussing this. So if you put it into shields up, basically, as it would suggest, there's no ports to be opened inbound or outbound. So basically, what OTG have requested in the form of a DCR is that when the machine goes into shields up, group policy will still be downloaded and ports will still be open, but once that's done, the user will not be able to change any of the ports themselves to allow ports to be opened or closed. So that's something that OTG themselves have requested, so that users basically don't undo the work that group policy's already done to make the machine secure when it's off the network somewhere else, if that makes sense. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Jack Creasey. This next section on WMI, let me start off by saying WMI should have zero impact on your applications. So hopefully we'll see no difficulties with it at all. And I'll kind of explain, there's two areas. One is you've just seen that ICF could be an impact to you. It could also be an impact to WMI. WMI is used to provide management for your clients. So for those people that are touched by SMS, the help desk reach down into their machines and try and repair things, they use WMI. They actually use an SMS agent. So WMI is kind of split. There's a MOM agent and an SMS agent. And then there's some things that we get by reaching directly into the machine via this WMI interface, and we figure out what's going on with the machine. So we can look at registry settings, we can look at dynamic settings within the machine, and tell the user what's wrong with their machine. All right. So when ICF is turned on, there's a possibility that the clients may become unmanaged, which isn't a good state. all right? Because then if they ring up and say there's something wrong, we can't reach in and help them. So we're avidly interested in exactly what this group policy looks like and gets applied to the client at the time we roll out SP2. So when we roll it out, a group policy will apply. That application will configure ICF, and ICF will now either allow us to use WMI or not allow us. We're hoping it will allow us, and we'll try and configure it that way so that we don't have any problems. All right? So that's the only issue with ICF. It can prevent us from working, and it can turn us into an unmanaged client, which we don't want. So we have to work with whoever's doing the configuration for ICF to make sure that we can reach into the machine using the correct ports and get that done. The second part of the equation is that we had no security on the connection to WMI service. And what that means is you make a TCP connection into the client, then over that you run RPC. What the product group would like to do now is to turn that into a secure RPC connection so that the data that flows between the client and whoever the management terminal is that's looking into the machine sees encrypted data or decrypts the data. So no one can snatch that data off the wire and potentially broach your machine. All right, so it's a pure security enhancement that we have. All right. The next detail is just what I've just said. GPO will apply it. Now, when you're in the Redmond domain, when you connect up to our domain, you will have group policy. That will be applied on your machine, and it will set exactly what ports are open. So we'll be able to look through that. So we have to be part of that setting up the policy. The things that we need to worry about are, can SMS still push out packages to the clients? Again, that's a ports thing. Can MOM still acquire data from servers and clients, or clients in this case for SP2, and making sure that the right ports are opened. Over the next week and a half, we're going to see a list of ports that are going to be required for the rollout for the group policy to configure ICF. This is the security part of it, and the program, by default, what we've done, or what the program group has done, product group has done, is they've taken WMI implementation from Windows Server 2003, and they've ripped out that code and put it back into the XP client. And since that was the most recent code written, it's the most reliable, it's the most up-to-date. And so we should see very, very little in the way of bugs that turn up at that point in time, because we release bug-free software all the time. So that should be a smooth transition into there. The main change is that what they want to do now is they want to be able to turn on the security, increase the security, improve the security. And by default, it's turned off. So we're going to have to set a registry setting to turn on secure RPC for WMI. And so as part of that rollout, we will turn that on and see if it breaks anything, all right? And everybody's sure, everybody's drinking champagne at the moment, and they're saying, we don't think it'll break anything. But just in case it does, perhaps we better test it. So they're going to turn it on, and in our first rollout of clients, we'll see what breaks. And if there's any surprises in there, deal with them as we need to. The nice thing about it is that it's very easy to turn off. So we can recoup from the errors very, very quickly, and we should have a process in place by the time the rollout goes so that people, if they are impacted, can be rolled back and the security can be turned off. So I'm not sure that it's going to be a very great problem for us. The biggest impact is not for applications, and I think not so much for the boards, but for the people who are writing the management software that catalogs our system, audits our systems, and so on. And so some scripts will change. There's some scripts to develop during the rollout, but the rest of it is fairly straightforward and I hope seamless for you guys. And I think that's it. Unless there's any questions. Thank goodness for that.
My name is Kurt Schmucker. I'm a PM in the IE group, and I want to talk to you today about the changes in IE that are coming for SP2. If you analyze most of the security issues related to IE, they boil down often to an elevation of privilege attack. And so we've focused our efforts on mitigating all those attacks that would cause some sort of elevation of privilege. The feeling we want to give end users is that if they're using IE as it comes out of the box, unless they download some extra code, they're safe. And we want to sort of make it feel like that for them. There are a number of changes to make this happen. I've organized them for the sake of this presentation along the line of sort of my guess as to where there will be app compat issues. One thing we've done is change the local machine zone a lot. For a number of malicious web users, getting their code to execute in the local machine zone is sort of the goal because it has so much more privileges. So we've tried to mitigate this in a number of ways. Some malicious websites have been able to download an object, get it into the cache, and then cause a navigation to a good site. That object survives the navigation, and it's able to execute with the name of that good site. So we've changed the object caching so that that can't happen anymore, and that objects preserve their security context. Another example is zone elevation. A malicious website is able to spawn a child, either a frame or a new page. It's in the local machine zone, inject a script into that page, and then execute that script with the protections of the local machine zone. So we're going to block zone elevation from a site from a zone that's less trusted to a zone that's more trusted, and that'll just be stopped. And lastly, we've actually changed the security settings for the local machine zone. So suppose we weren't able to cover all the ways that a malicious website could get into the local machine zone. Well, now when they get there, it won't be as rich an environment. The security settings for the local machine zone will be almost equal to that of the internet. So there'll be no reason to try to do a zone elevation attack. Another area is that inside IE, there are a number of different places that check on the MIME type of a file that's being downloaded, or at least try to guess what that file type is. Sometimes these guesses were different, and people could use this difference to cause a file to be used in a way it wasn't intended. So now we're going to stop that. So MIME handling won't allow object type to be elevated. For example, you couldn't, if the file server that's sending out a file says it's a text file, but it really contains HTML, IE won't allow that file to be considered as HTML anymore. It'll be considered just as text and renders as text, that kind of thing. So MIME handling, elevation of privilege attacks will be stopped. And the last thing, there's a kind of thing in IE called binary behaviors. It's sort of like an ActiveX control. Up till now, there was no URL action that controlled the execution of binary behaviors. And so they could be executed even in the restricted sites zone. So we've added an URL action that will control the execution of binary behaviors, and we've disabled that for the restricted sites zone. The main app compat impact here is that most email programs and web-based email clients read their mail from the restricted sites zone. So if those pieces of email use binary behaviors, those won't execute, so the mail won't necessarily be rendered correctly. We've talked to the Outlook folks. We told them how to get around this. They're working on that fix for the later version of Outlook now. Some changes in IE that may cause some app compat issues. There have been a number of UI spoofing attacks, and these range from putting up a little white rectangle on top of the cancel button in a dialog, so all the user sees is the OK button. That's the only choice they have. Or putting up a dialog so that it looks like it was put up by Windows or by IE, and the user doesn't know it was put up by badguys.com. So we've changed the last example is bringing up a window totally off screen and having it do some things that the user can't see or control. So we've changed a number of the rules for the display of pop-ups, and to have it be that these social engineering attacks will no longer be as evident. You will be clear that this isn't a dialog put up by Windows. You won't be able to have something pop up off screen, things like this. There's also were some cases where some controls that are already existing in IE weren't being respected. There were some cases where ActiveX controls that had been kill-bitted were still being instantiated, and there were some cases of ActiveX controls that didn't respect object safety that were being initialized. Those have now been stopped. Luckily, the largest set of changes to IE are things that we think will have no app compat impact at all. If you're downloading files, we're going to examine it in a more thorough way, the certificates on those files. And if that certificate chain, for example, is invalid in some way, we're not going to just let the user download those files. The change in IE that probably will be the most liked by consumers and business people alike is Pop-up Manager to control all those pop-ups you see springing up all the time. This will be a whitelisted thing, so if you need to add, if you need to put up pop-ups, the user can enter something, a domain name in this list, and those will be allowed. That'll be controllable by group policy. We've added an URL action that will control the execution of the Microsoft Java Virtual Machine. And this is sort of a safety switch for some time in the future. If we need to disable it, that is, disable the Microsoft Java Virtual Machine, we'll be able to. That switch will not be turned on by default. So out of the box, Java hardening is not enabled. But if we need to, if there were to be a problem with Java that were to be, show up later, we have an easy switch to throw to turn it off. We've done, of course, a lot of work, like many of you have heard about, for buffer overruns, and we're going after those as much as we can. We don't believe this will have any app compat impact. It'll just make IE a stronger, more secure platform. And the last thing is, there were some cases of websites, malicious websites, that would, behind the user's back, change the home page. You know, on exit, change the home page to this. We won't allow that any longer for non-user initiated things. If this breaks your app, you deserve to be broken. And that's it for me. We also have a document specifically for testers that sort of goes through each of the features. For every feature that we could, we've added a control that will enable you to turn on and turn off that feature. That control will only be in the beta, so you can use it to quickly funnel down and say, oh, it's exactly this one thing that was changed in IE Springboard that's causing me a problem. Then you can get right to the test team or to the PM involved with that change, and you can prove that that's what is breaking your app. Then we can then file a bug on it and so on. So the triage process will be much better. I'll make sure Stephanie gets that document. It's long, but it'll tell you, if you think object caching is causing a problem, then take the following 3 steps. If your bug is still repros, then that's the problem. File it. I'll be happy to try and answer any questions now. Yes?
Do you foresee any issues with applications that are trying to add their URLs in the list of trusted sites?
So the question is, if an application tries to add its URL to the trusted site zone, do I see a problem here? No. I suppose there could be some way that they're doing it that would go against one of the things I've mentioned. Off the top of my head, I can't see an issue. Other questions?
The Java hardening switch, you said it will not be turned on by default. So where can we turn it on so we can test our
Okay. So the question had to do with the Java hardening switch. There'll be a new URL action which will be in each security zone. Right now, you have some controls on Java. It just says Java, high security, low security, that sort of thing. It turns out those controls affect the notion of Java, regardless of whose virtual machine you're using. The Microsoft one, the Sun one, the IBM one, whatever. So that'll still be there. So if you want to just disable the whole idea of Java, go ahead and use those controls. They'll be renamed so they'll be clear that what they're doing. We're adding a new control which only affects the Microsoft Java Virtual Machine, and it has the name Microsoft Java Virtual Machine, very imaginative. So just disable or enable that one control. You can do it in a specific zone if you wish. For businesses that would like to move away from Java, or are they worried about Java security issues, but they have a line of business applications they've got to keep using, what we're already telling them is, fine, disable Java in general, turn on the Microsoft Java Virtual Machine only in the trusted sites zone, add the domain of that server in the trusted sites list, your Java app will continue to work just fine. So that's a scenario we're telling people. You could, with these switches, just turn Java back on for the entire internet. If you're going to do that, what's the point? I mean, you might as well just leave it alone. But the switches are all there. My test team just finished pass one on the testing of it, and all the bugs they filed are marked to be fixed before beta. Well, question in the back.
The pop-up window manager that you mentioned, it's going to require that the user input like the URL that they'll accept pop-ups from? Is that the way I heard it? Because I think if you look at the freeware and shareware out there, those are the least popular. That's the most burdensome on the user.
So the question had to do with the pop-up manager and how does that work. There will be a whitelist. So there will be, this so-and-so site has tried to put up a pop-up. Allow this, allow it, put this into the zone for the list for allowing in the future, disallow. You can also, if you don't want to be bothered with that dialogue a lot, you can turn off that. Just put a little icon up in the sort of a status bar that said, I just blocked a pop-up. And you can either ignore that little icon popping up or showing up or not. You can click on it. It will say, oh, here are the places where I just blocked pop-ups, and you can enable those again. You can go to that white list, and you can sort of look at it. You can edit it. Those are the sort of user controls. We realize that pop-ups are one of the biggest pain issues for both consumers and businesses. So we tried to make it not a very intrusive control that you could do real easy things quickly and your overall browsing experience would be better. This isn't actually a security issue, but it's more the perception of security. Like, who's in charge of this machine, me or some clown on the outside? And if you feel it, that you're more in charge of your machine, you'll have a better overall feeling. So it's kind of a psychological social engineering issue, but we think it'll be real popular, and it might even increase the adoption of SP2 out there in the world, and that's a good thing. Question?
So that's not inherent in IE. It's only if you have a pop-up window manager that you purchase outside.
No. The question is this part of IE? And the answer is yes. In SP2 IE, pop-up manager is a built-in feature of IE. Question in the back.
Web page, bringing up a bunch of pop-ups you didn't want.
The question is, do I think the pop-up manager is going to do the right thing and know what a pop-up is as opposed to a user-initiated click? Yes, I believe so, but you can tell me during the beta if we hit it correctly.
Is spyware on the roadmap? Identifying spyware on your machine?
Is identifying spyware part of IE SP2? I don't believe so.
Is that on the roadmap, the future roadmap?
I've never heard it mentioned. I've heard it talked about as being a horrible thing, but I've never heard of a mechanism for detecting it and eliminating it or blocking it or anything like that. Let's let those guys do that. Other questions? Great. Thank you very much.
So I'll just wrap this up real quickly, let you guys get out of here. Oops. So this this last slide is some recommended testing instructions for you. I'm not going to go through it in detail here, but certainly we'll have it out on our website. We'll send it in emails and have it readily available for you. The bottom line is we need your feedback on all these changes. Your feedback is extremely important to us. It will help shape the product before our customers get it. So we're looking for feedback in a number of ways. Updating MS apps with your test results of passed, failed, or failed non-critical. Submitting bugs via the Windows Product Studio database, which will give you some specific access to. And letting me know if you're coming up with blocking issues and you need help right away, certainly flag me and we'll get those issues addressed and get you talking to the right product group folks so that you can get your issues addressed. So with that, I'm going to wrap up unless anybody has any specific questions, or Elliot, you want to add anything? I will post it out on our team site after this meeting. Elliot, anything you want to add?
Remember to sign in if you didn't sign in.
Please.
And this will be available
on demand probably in the next week or so.
How long?
How long?
Yeah.
About 10 minutes.
Very quickly. All right, thanks everyone.
Okay, thanks.
Oh, okay.